Hello, how are you? Welcome to my video. Today we are going to understand id, ego, and superego. And as to remember, we are going to have a mind fact section in the end. Now, before we start, I would like to ask you something. We have often heard phrases like fragile ego, your ego got hurt, ego problem. What is ego? And is ego really that bad? Or is it even ego at all? Let's find out. But before we start, I want you to carefully observe the 3 scenarios on your screen. We will understand what is happening in each of them.
I am going to eat the entire cake. It looks good, but I can't have sugar. The cake looks very tempting, but I also can't have this much sugar. Maybe I can have 1 slice of it and walk a mile extra.
If you have watched all the videos, I welcome you to the 3 roommates of Sigmund Freud: id, ego, and superego. After looking at those scenes, who do you think was the ego amongst them? If you think it was scene 2, you are probably wrong. Let's understand this with something very basic. The angel, the devil, and me.
You should do the right thing.
No, do what benefits you.
Do you remember cartoons from childhood? Where there used to be an angel and a devil whispering in your ears, always telling you what to do and what not to? The angel was the one who made you do all the good things, while the devil made you do all the bad. And then there was you, in the middle, deciding whose voice to listen to. Similarly, according to Sigmund Freud, personality is made up of 3 parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. Now we will understand who amongst these is the devil, who is the angel, and who are we. The id is the part that seeks immediate gratification. The ego manages reality, and the superego represents our moral standards. Together, these 3 components interact to shape our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. Now, let's study deep into each one. First, the id, the primary instinctual part. The id is present from birth. It operates entirely on the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants immediately, with 0 regard for consequences, rules, or other people. It is the part of you that wants to eat the entire cake. Hit snooze 1 more time. See the rude comment out loud. Skip the gym, or sleep all day and want everything right now. We mark this one as the devil.
Next, we talk about is the superego, known as the moral compass. The superego develops through upbringing, culture, parents, religion, and society. It represents internalized rules, values, and ideals, basically your conscience and your sense of who you should be. It can produce guilt, shame, and also pride. We mark this one as the angel. Now, the ego, the part people are most confused about. The ego is the realistic mediator. It develops as we grow and starts operating on something called the reality principle. Its job is to find realistic ways to satisfy the id's desires without causing problems. Or we can say without offending superego. Ego is the negotiator, the practical voice, the, okay, but how do we actually do this without ruining everything, part of you. For example, the id says, eat the entire ice cream tub right now. And the ego says, okay, but let's eat 1 bowl now and save the rest for later, so you're not sick by midnight. The ego doesn't kill the desire, it just finds a workable compromise. Now, that's you.
I mean, all three of them are you. But in the angel and devil scenario, you are the one playing the role of ego. You are the one who listens to both sides, finds the middle ground, and tries not to hurt anyone in the process. This is how you manage your everyday decisions, small to big. The ego is the judge who listens to both the id and the superego and decides the middle ground so that neither the desire is completely killed nor the superego completely takes over. Moving ahead, where do these three roommates actually stay? Freud had an answer to this. You can see on your screen the iceberg model that Freud described. The id sits completely below, deep in the unconscious, present from birth, entirely hidden from our everyday awareness. While the ego and superego, parts of them are visible above the surface, and parts of them still live below, in the unconscious. Each part of our personality plays a different role, and they are constantly interacting, constantly influencing how we act and how we engage with the world around us. Summing up again, each of the three components develop at different stages of life.
Summing up again, each of the three components develop at different stages of life. The id works on the pleasure principle. It needs immediate gratification, and it needs survival. Nothing more, nothing less. The ego works on the reality principle. It looks at the world as it actually is and finds the most comfortable, acceptable path forward, one that satisfies us, but is also acceptable to society. And the superego is our conscience, the moral watchdog that observes everything we do and continuously pushes us toward what has been shaped into our values, our ethics, and our morals. Now, these three things together shape our personality. In some people, the id overshadows the superego. In some, the superego overshadows the id. And in some, the ego manages to hold the balance most of the time. And this is how different personalities are formed. Now, this is something extra. If you want to know more, or if you want better marks in your psychology paper, Freud was actually Austrian. He wrote everything in German. And in German, he used three beautifully simple, everyday words. Words that any German child would understand. Das Es, which means the it. Das Ich, which means the I. Das Über-Ich, which means the over-I, or the above-I. That's it. Nothing fancy, nothing clinical. Freud deliberately chose the most ordinary, human words possible because he wanted to show that these weren't abstract philosophical concepts. These were living, breathing parts of you. The it, the I, the over-I. The id, the ego, the superego. Now, the question we started with, if the ego is this good a gentleman, why is it always blamed? This is actually one of the most interesting gaps between psychology and everyday language. When people say ego in daily life, they are not talking about Freud's ego at all. They are using a completely different, older meaning of the word. Long before Freud, ego simply meant the self, your sense of who you are, your self-importance, your identity. When someone says he has a big ego, or his ego is fragile, they mean his sense of self is inflated or easily threatened. That usage has nothing to do with Freud. It predates him entirely. What Freud did was borrow that same word and give it a very specific, narrow job inside his model. For Freud, the ego is the rational mediator, the only sane voice in the room, the one trying to hold everything together while the id screams for pleasure and the superego drowns in guilt. In Freud's world, the ego is actually the hero. But the problem is, Freud used an everyday word for a technical concept, and the world kept using it the old way.
So two parallel meanings lived side by side and never fully separated. And here is where it gets even more interesting. Even within Freud's own theory, the ego uses defenses, denial, projection, rationalization, deflection, specifically to protect the person's sense of self from anxiety and threat. So when someone's ego is hurt, what is actually happening psychologically is that the ego's defenses have been pierced. Something got through. The armor cracked. A fragile ego, in that sense, is actually a very Freudian idea. It just means a person whose defenses are so thin, so reactive, that even a small criticism feels like a catastrophic threat to the self. The ego isn't absent, it's actually overworking, defending constantly, collapsing easily. So ironically, the phrase fragile ego is more Freudian than most people realize, just not in the way they think. Now, what happens when the conflict between the id and the superego becomes too much for the ego to handle? Moral anxiety, fear of the superego, guilt, shame, the feeling that you have violated or are about to violate your own internalized values. And the difficult thing about this particular anxiety is it doesn't need anyone else to be in the room. The superego is judge enough on its own. When any of these anxieties become chronic, when the ego is constantly managing this internal war, the psychological cost accumulates. Energy that should be going toward living, connecting, creating, and growing is instead consumed by internal conflict management conflict. Over time, this can manifest as anxiety disorders, depression, personality patterns, and difficulties in relationships. And the ego, exhausted, reaches for its toolkit.
That toolkit is called defense mechanisms. Some of the defense mechanisms we encounter in everyday life are repression, denial, projection, rationalization, displacement, and many more. We will study each of these in full detail in our Theories of Psychology set, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed the video, and next time someone says your ego got hurt, remember, poor ego has been taking blame for almost 100 years. Like every educational video, we will have a mind fact section, followed by a small quiz in the end, where you have to guess whether it's id, ego, and superego. Mind fact section. Here is something that might just change the way you see yourself. Your superego, that inner voice that tells you what is right, what is wrong, what to feel proud of, and what to feel ashamed of, was mostly built before you turned 7 years old. Every rule you were told, every punishment you received, every look of disappointment on a parent's face, every cultural and religious message absorbed through the adults around you, all of it was quietly written into your superego before you were old enough to question any of it. You didn't build your inner critic. It was built for you. And most people spend their entire lives feeling guilty about things they never personally decided were wrong, living under rules they never consciously agreed to. So here is something worth sitting with today. Maybe it is time to go through that old rulebook, not to throw everything away, but to gently ask yourself, with your own adult mind for the very first time, do I actually believe this? Or was I just taught to? Because the superego was installed without your permission. But what you keep, what you let go of, and what you choose to rewrite, that part is entirely yours. Now it's time for quiz! You will be presented with a thought, and you have to guess whether the thought represents id, ego, or superego. So let's start.
That's it. Let us know in the comment section how much did you score.
Thank you for watching.